All right, I think we are live. Okay, I think we're live. All right. Hey everyone, welcome, and thank you for joining me in the session. As always, I want to say that I'm just honored to be with you here in this time of sensitivity and uncertainty, and I look forward to sharing our time together in our shared sacred space today. I hope everyone is happy and safe and healthy wherever you are in the world today. And we'll go ahead and get started. So the things we'll do together in our sacred space today are, number one, we're going to set sacred space. And then we'll have our overall kind of topic for the week, which this week will be the three realms of being. The three realms of being. And I'll talk all about what we mean by that. We'll have a bit of an exercise related to that, and then we'll go ahead and close sacred space. So in setting sacred space, what we would like to do here as we set sacred space is that we would like to create a space together which is devoid of fear, threat, and control, in order for us to open to higher guidance from within our own selves, however we define that, right? So it could be flashes of intuition, it could be a higher muse, a higher guide that comes to us, just random brilliant flashes of insight like you get when you're in the shower or on a long run or something. But the point is to intentionally create a safe sanctuary space for us all to be able to relax and surrender, to be receptive to this guidance. And to do that, we need to have no feeling of danger or threat around us, so that we can all together partake of the emotional nourishment and the spiritual nourishment that specifically only come from being in sacred space together as a group. And in opening sacred space today, I am proposing, as I do every week, that we all follow the 4 principles of proceeding in sacred space. Number 1, confidentiality. Standard Vegas rules: what happens in sacred space stays in sacred space. Now, of course, that's the thing we follow when we're in person and we're visiting with advisees around the world. Here online, the feed, the stream is public, the replay will be public. So the way we handle confidentiality in an online setting is via anonymization. So if you would like to be anonymous, and you don't have to be anonymous, but if you would like to be, you would come into the Crowdcast stream, go into your edit profile function, and then just change your username to Harry Potter, Mickey Mouse, what have you, and then come back in and continue chatting and asking questions under that username. Number 2, the second principle is that we would like to maintain an environment of no threat, no controlling, and regardless of intention. So even if it's well-intentioned controlling, right? So said another way, no fixing, no interventions, no curing, no tough love, right? None of the sort of, well, this is going to hurt me more than it hurts you, but it's good for you. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that, right? But because we're trying to sort of get ourselves into sacred space, because there are certain things you can only do when you're in sacred space, we would like to refrain from that, right? We would like to refrain from all that. Even if it's good, even if it's beneficial, we leave that for the profane, because the minute you try to control, even with a good intention, you're exercising control, and that pitches you categorically back into the realm of the profane. Now, there's nothing wrong with the profane. It's just if we're trying to stay in the sacred to get things done that we want to get done in the sacred, accidentally pitching ourselves back out into the profane will just make it more complicated. And so, said another way, in sacred space, we are holding space for each other to actually be however we find ourselves in the moment. So if you're afraid, if you're anxious, if you're happy and relaxed, that's okay. We all mutually hold space for each other to be however we are. In addition to how you are feeling, you may have feelings about how you're feeling. So I'm afraid and I feel incompetent that I'm afraid. I'm afraid and I feel righteous anger that I'm afraid. Right? Why wouldn't I be afraid? And however you're feeling about how you are, we hold space for that too. It's just however you are, however you feel about it. We leave you as you are to be together. The third principle is a corollary to the first two, which is no commerce. Right? So in sacred space, nothing may be sold. I can't sell you anything. Gowrie, my editor in Bangalore, who will be up in a moment, cannot sell you anything. We are here for your energy, not for the things you bring. We are here for what you are, not for what you do or provide. We're not here for your value add. We're not here for your function. We're here for you, which is separate from your function. And that may not always feel to be the case, especially in the profane, where everyone's always, trying to get a piece of you or trying to give you a piece of themselves, right? But in the sacred, all of that tends to fall away. So please don't sell things to each other in the chat. Please refrain from that. But that also holds for recommendations or suggestions. So if someone says, I'm really having a tough time with this or that, and you say, oh, I had that myself, or my sister-in-law had that, and let me tell you, this book was the best thing, right? So even well-meaning, and it's not your book, you don't get any sort of compensation for pitching the book. It's just out of a well-meaning thing. Even that kind of soft recommendation, we try to refrain from in sacred space. Because even a recommendation, if you're having a tough time and I recommend a book, there's an implied threat there, which is not malicious, but it's like, okay, so if I don't check out this book that Artie recommended, I may be the dunderhead that doesn't get his pain relieved or whatever. And again, back in profane space, go crazy, right? But in sacred space, we're trying to get certain things done, and we want to try to keep the quality of the space just as clean as possible, just because it's got a nice flavor to it. And then the fourth principle related to a corollary of the above is that also there is no expectation of participation. Okay, so there's no pressure to do anything. You can chat or not chat. You can ask questions or not ask questions. You can come and go as you please, right? So there's no fear, threat, and control to even get you to come into sacred space or get you to stay in sacred space. Because it's sacred space, there's no fear, threat, or control, ideally. Right? So again, there's no pressure to do anything or not do anything. The nourishment of this space comes from the held space together and your presence and attention. It comes from what you are, not from what you do or provide. And that's a very different quality here. Let me just check. There should be a stream on Facebook. It's telling me there's a stream, so I'm just can maybe sort of check it again. But let me know. Okay. And so that's sort of the lowdown on the four principles of sacred space. And all of us together doing that for ourselves and for each other will tend to amplify that effect, right? So it's like a big potluck feast of this sort of emotional and spiritual nourishment that we all get to sort of feed off of, right, together. So this is what I propose. And if you are not okay with that, that's totally okay. There's no fear, threat, or control for you to stay in sacred space. We will now pause for a moment to give everyone a chance to take a breath and decide whether they would like to continue together into sacred space or not. And if not, that's totally okay. This is your time to withdraw from the group if you would like. And we'll still catch up with you later in profane space. If you're on my email list, I'm still going to send you emails. And we'll still hang out, no worries at all. Okay. So I'll pause now just to give everyone a moment to dial that in and make their selection. Okay. All right. And so for the rest of us here, we will now move forward together into our sacred space. And as we cross the threshold together into our shared sacred space, I'll just remind us all, myself included, of the four principles we would like to adhere to while we're in this space together. Confidentiality / anonymization, no fear, threat, or control, no tough love, no fixing, no commerce, no recommendations, suggestions, and no expectation of participation. All right. Okay. Welcome to our shared sacred space. Happy Sunday for this, our 57th session of live sacred space. One of the best parts of my week, and thank you for coming in to share this time together. So our session topic for this week will be the 3 realms of being. The 3 realms of being. So in this session, we came to a story that Gary, my editor in Bangalore, selected, which led us to a reflection of the nature, sort of an introductory sort of reflection on the nature of the 3 realms of being, and the importance of actually allowing oneself to move freely across all of them. And the story Gary selected is from the Turkish tradition, folktale tradition. So what I'd like to do now is to invite Gary on screen and tell us about the story she's chosen, and then maybe tell it for us, and then see how we go from there. Hi, Gary.
Hi, everyone.
Thank you for joining us. I can see and hear you perfectly.
Oh, great. Thank you.
Happy Sunday. And would you tell us about the story you've selected this week?
Yeah, I mean, when I'm kind of not sure what story to pick, I just dive into, the huge archive of Andrew Lang's collections, because there's just stories from every tradition there, and see what clicks for me, right? So, which is what I did this time. And there was the story, which has many features of a typical, let's say, European or even a Mediterranean folktale tradition. So it has all these flavors of magical, sudden accidental meetings with magical people, and all sorts of things happening, bizarre things. So there is that flavor, but it's somewhat slightly different from the usual European fairy tales that we've done. So yeah,
excellent.
We'll dig into that.
Okay. Want to tell it for us?
Okay. All right. So the story is, like I said, from one of the collections of Turkish folk tales that was collected into a collection written in German, and then from there Andrew Lang kind of put it into his own collection across all sorts of traditions that he had. And the story is called The Boy Who Found Fear at Last. So, I mean, typically this is a story about a fearless boy. So once upon a time, there lived a woman who had one son whom she loved dearly, and her cottage, the cottage where they lived, was on the outskirts of a forest. So they had no neighbors. There was no one to give them company. So the place was very lonely. And the boy was at home with his mother all the time to give her company. So one day, on a winter's evening, they were sitting together when a storm suddenly sprang up. There was a sudden gust of wind, and that blew the door open, right? And the woman suddenly kind of started and shivered and looked over her shoulder. And she almost expected to see something horrible, like a monster or something, behind her. And she said, "Go and shut the door, I'm frightened." And the boy then said, "Frightened? What does it feel like to be frightened?" "Well," the mother said, just frightened. A fear of something, and you don't even know what, but this fear takes hold of you. And the boy said, "Well, it must be very odd to feel like that." And then he thought, "I will go through the world and I will seek fear until I find it." So the next morning, before his mother was even out of bed, he had already left the house and left the forest behind him. And after walking for some hours, he reached a mountain and he began to climb it. So near the top of the mountain, in a very wild spot, he came upon a band of robbers. And this group of men, they were sitting around a fire. It was quite cold. And the boy himself was feeling quite cold and tired by now. He was delighted to see there was a fire there, and he went up to the men. He greeted them, and he kind of pushed himself in between the men, till his feet almost touched the burning wood. And the robbers were surprised. They turned around, looked at him curiously, and then the captain said, "No one dares come here, right? Not even birds come near our camp. Who are you who just walked in so boldly?" And the boy said, "Well, I've left my mother's house and I'm going in search of fear. Do you know where it is, and can you show it to me?" And the captain said, "Fear is where we are, right? I mean," so the boy looked around and said, "But where? I can't see it." So then the captain of the robbers said, "Okay, I'll give you a pot and some flour, some butter, sugar. Take it to the churchyard, which lies a distance down there. Bake us a cake, and maybe we'll see." So the boy quite happily jumped up. He was quite warm by now, so he put the pot over his arm, ran down the hill until he came to the churchyard, collected sticks, made a fire, filled the pot with water, and he started mixing the flour, butter and sugar together, set the cake to cook. So he did all of that. And as the cake was getting crisp and brown, the boy lifted it up, placed it on a stone, and he was about to put out the fire. And a hand came out from a grave. And a voice said, "Is that cake for me?" And the boy replied instantly. He said, "Do you think I'm going to give to the dead the food that meant for the living?" And he laughed, and he gave the hand a little tap with a spoon, picked up the cake, and he went back to where the robbers were. And the robbers said, "Well, did you find fear?" And the boy said, "No. Was it there? Was I supposed to find it?" And I saw nothing but a hand that came from a grave. It belonged to someone who wanted my cake, and I said no. And then the captain just looked at him and he said, "All right, okay, there's another chance for you. Go to the other side of the mountain. There's a deep pool. Go there, and, who knows, you might meet fear on the way." And the boy said, "I hope so." And he set out and he went to the other side of the mountain. There was this pool that was gleaming in the moonlight. It was already dark by the time he reached. And as he went close to the pool, he saw there was a tall swing standing just over the pool. And in the swing, there was a child. The child was crying. And the boy thought, that's quite a strange place for a swing. And I wonder what the child's crying about. And as he went close, a maiden ran up and she spoke to him. And she said, "I want to lift my little brother from the swing, but it's so high above that I can't reach it. And if you can get closer to the edge of the pool and let me mount on your shoulders, I think I can reach him. Will you help me?" And the boy said, "Well, of course." And immediately the girl climbed on his shoulders. But instead of lifting the child, which she could have easily had done by then, she pressed her feet firmly on either side of his neck. That the boy felt that in another minute he would either choke or else fall into the water. So he gathered all his strength, he gave a heavy push, and he threw the girl backwards. And when she fell to the ground, a bracelet fell from her arm, and the youth picked it up. And he said, "Well, I think I will keep this as a remembrance of all the weird things that have happened to me. And he wore the bracelet himself. He put it on his hand, right? And then he started walking down from the mountain, away from the mountain, into a little town, right? And as he was walking into the town, a man stopped him. And he said, "Where did you get that bracelet? That belongs to me." And the boy said, "No, it's mine." And the man went on, "No, it's mine, so give it to me." And they had this conflict, right? So the boy then said, "Well, seems like we both claim this bracelet for ours. So let's go before a judge and we will tell him what happened. And if he decides that it's yours, you can keep it. But if he decides it's mine, I will keep it." So the man agreed to this, and they both went to the judge. And the judge listened very carefully to what each of them had to say. And then he looked at the bracelet and said, "It seems like this bracelet is one of a pair. So whoever can produce the other one in the pair, I will know that it truly belongs to you." And the boy and the man both looked at each other because they both knew they didn't have the other one. So they just gave up. So the judge got to keep the bracelet with him until one of them came with the other to prove, the ownership, right? So they left the bracelet there. The boy walked away. And after a distance, he found himself on the seashore. And as he entered that place where he could look at the sea, there was a ship which had struck itself on a rock, and it was rapidly sinking. And the crew were all, terrified. Their faces were all white, so they were crying and screaming. And the boy cried out back to them and said, "Have you met with fear?" And they were all saying, "Oh, help us if you can. We are frightened. We're all drowning." And then immediately, this boy took off his clothes, jumped into the sea. And he tried to see what was happening. And immediately, he followed a chain which kind of went into the sea. So he called out to the crew and said, "Quick, give me a rope and I'll find out." And they threw him a rope, which he tied to the middle of his body. And the other end of the rope, he tied to the mast. And then he went down into the sea. And he went down and down and down until at last his feet almost touched the bottom. And he looked around him. And sure enough, there was a sea maiden who was tugging hard at a chain which she had fastened to the ship. And she was dragging it beneath the surface. And so the boy saw this. He seized her arms. He forced her to drop the chain. And he made sure the ship, was steady so that the sailors were then able to kind of gently float her off the rock. And then he took a rusty knife, and the knife was lying right there in the heap of seaweed. He cut the rope round his waist, and he used the same rope to tie the sea maiden so that she couldn't do any more mischief. And doing this, he kind of went back to the surface, went back to the beach where his clothes were lying, and dressed himself up. And he walked on till he came to a beautiful garden. And it was hot and he was tired. So he entered the garden and found himself around a clump of bushes, and he fell asleep. And suddenly there was this rush of wings. There was a cool breeze that awakened him, and he kind of looked up to see there were 3 doves playing in the stream. And they splashed about and they kind of shook themselves up, dived into the pool, came back up again. And when they appeared, they were no longer doves, but 3 beautiful women. And between them, there was a table, and they had drinking cups placed on them. So one of the maidens filled a cup from a crystal goblet, and then she raised it. And another woman stopped her and said, "To whose health do you drink?" And this woman who had raised the goblet said, "To the youth who prepared the cake and wrapped my hand with the spoon." And I've never seen anyone so fearless. "So to whose health do you drink?" She turned around and asked the other woman. And she said, "To the youth on whose shoulders I climbed at the edge of the pool and who threw me off. And I lay unconscious on the ground for hours." And then she turned to the third woman and said, "You, my sister, to whose health do you drink?" And she said, "Well, down in the sea, I took hold of a ship and I shook it and I pulled it. And this youth came and he freed the ship and bound me to a rock. To his health I drink." And they all three lifted their cups and drank quietly. And as they put their cups down, this boy appeared before them. He said, "I'm the youth you were talking about. And now give me that other bracelet that matches the one that I took from you." And he tells them that, a man tried to take the bracelet from me, and now the judge wants the other pair, the other one of the pair. So give me the bracelet. And when they heard this, the women took him with them down into a passage and into a hall. And this hall opened up into many chambers. And each of these chambers was filled with gold and jewels and big boxes of treasure. And a maiden picked up a bracelet and gave it to him, and it looked exactly like the one that he had given to the judge's keeping. And she put it around his arm and said, "Go right away, show this to the judge, and he will give you the other one." And the boy took that and he went back into the town. He found the judge. He showed him the other pair. He found the two bracelets and he took them back. Right? And now all of this had happened and he still hadn't met fear, which is what he set out to do. So he kept on walking, and one day he entered a large town, and all the streets and squares were full of people, so full of people that he hardly found space to squeeze between them. And he turned to a man and asked, "Why is there so much crowd? Why have they gathered together?" And the man said, "The ruler of this country is dead, and he has no children. We need to find a successor, right? So each morning, one of the sacred pigeons is let loose from the tower of the palace. And whoever the bird picks by, perching on their head, giving some kind of a sign, but the pigeon has to pick one person, and that man is our king." And so far, nothing has happened. And in a few minutes, they're going to let the pigeon fly again. So we're just waiting to see what happens. Everyone was fixed on that tower. And the moment, the door of the tower opened, there was a beautiful pigeon that flew out. And it flew straight out, came and rested on the head of this boy. And everyone started to shout, "The king, the king." And as he listened to the cries of the people, the boy was struck suddenly with a vision. There was something that just flashed across his mind. He saw himself seated on a throne, and he saw himself spending his entire life trying and never succeeding to make poor people rich, miserable people happy, bad people good, and never doing anything that he wished to do. Not even able to marry the girl that he loved. And at this vision, he started screaming, "No, no." And he kind of hid his face in his hands and he tried to pull himself away. But the crowds who heard him thought that he was overcome by that whole, situation, which is so grand and, so shockingly overwhelming. So perhaps that's why he said no, and no one paid attention. And somebody said, well, let's just make sure, let's fly more pigeons and let's find out. And each pigeon that was let out followed the first pigeon and came and sat on the same boy. So everyone started shouting even more loudly, the king, the king. And this youth who heard all of this felt a cold shiver pass through him. And there was a voice that whispered into his ears that said, this is fear. And this is what you have sought for so long. And the youth then closed his eyes, looked at the vision which once more flashed before his eyes, and he sort of accepted that he will have to live his life with this fear beside him. So that's the story. Artie, would you like to come back up?
Oh.
Hi.
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 Thank you for that story.
Thank you. So that's the boy who met fear at last.
That is this was a difficult story for me to really sort of enter into.
So it was, yeah.
But
for me.
but I think we took a couple different angles at it. So I do have some notes, and let me start with my usual question, which is having read that story now another time, and in Sacred Space, where do you enter into that story?
Well, like I told you when we were sort of discussing it, that I found the story difficult too. I mean, I couldn't kind of make sense of any of what was going on until I came to almost the end. And even then, I didn't know what it all meant. But the end is what intrigued me, particularly because of something you had said in the last session last week, which is when this man, Gopani Kufa, goes into the underground, finds this magic mirror, brings it back up.
The story from the Zimbabwean tradition.
The Zimbabwean tradition that we
right.
did, the magic mirror, right?
Right,
so he finds this magic mirror, and what he asks of it is that he be made chief of the spectacularly rich and prosperous town, right? And your comment to that was, why would anyone want that when you have a magic mirror, right? Why would you want to sit as this chief of the town doing administrative work and kind of, looking after the affairs of the town? Why would you want that?
Right, that's the worst job.
That's the worst job. And here the boy seemed to agree with you. And when he was offered the role of the king, that's the first vision that he gets, the first thought, that I will spend the rest of my life being miserable. I mean, I don't really want this, right? So that is where I was kind of intrigued by the whole synchronicity, that the first story that I read after last week's was this thing that echoed what you said.
Totally.
And
because
yet,
go ahead. Yeah.
And yet he is kind of forced to take it up. It's almost like he doesn't have a choice, right? He can't say no to it. I mean, he does say no to it, but not like anyone listens to that. Whereas with Gopani Kufa last week, he didn't even think of saying no. Right? It doesn't occur to him.
He didn't even consciously ask himself the question of what he wanted. He just moved.
Right. So that whole thing of this stepping into this archetype of king, willingly or unwillingly, kind of consciously or unconsciously, it kind of intrigued me as to what is this thing that goes on that makes us step into this kind of a role, and how do we actually end up here?
Mm.
How did Gopani Kufa end up where he did? How did this boy end up where he did?
Yeah, I mean, usually it's more of a slightly allegorical thing where it's like, if all you care about is prestige, then you're going to end up getting a job like this,
Yeah.
because all the crappiest jobs have a lot of prestige because, you know,
Yeah.
you have to
Yeah.
be compensated in some sense.
Right.
But here it's like a different mechanism, right? He's not, there's no ambition, there's no like hunger, wounded hunger for like prestige or anything else. But he gets backed into it all the same through
Right.
this other mechanism, and that's the mechanism that we were kind of struggling with.
Right. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, that's what really hooked me to the story as to what's going. Like you said, with Gopani Kufa, we could have argued that, oh, you know, he became sort of starstruck with all that wealth and power. I mean, he didn't reflect long enough. He didn't think about it long enough. So maybe if he had thought about it, he might have wished for something different. So we can kind of rationalize it in all sorts of ways there. But here, we're brought to the story where there's absolutely no rationale to how he landed there, right? So I was really intrigued by that.
Thank you for that. I mean, it's interesting just for folks who may not have heard us explain this in the past, right? But when you're circumambulating, you're kind of doing this drunken walk of just following the golden thread, wherever it leads you, through dreams, through fairy tales like this. There tends to be a kind of shared vocabulary that accretes between yourself and, let's just call it, the movie studio of the dream side, right? Where they're like alley-ooping these stories for you, and you're like kind of hitting the balls. And it's like this call and answer kind of echoing within your own self. It's very beautiful. But the more you sort of pay mind to it and say, okay, you know, give me more, I'm going to actually read them, I'm going to sit with them, I'm going to invest attention, energy, reflection on it. The nature of the back and forth can become very nuanced and deep and fruitful as a result, right? So one of the things that will happen is, like we did a few months ago, we hit on this idea that music, right, was a symbol of delight, right? The thing you like for no good reason. And then in the following fairy tales, music would show up again and again in very subtle forms, right? It's not like you would just choose something, you know, because it was an overall theme of music. It would be this overall fairy tale, and then buried in there would be a little reference to music, and that would be the golden thread that we would connect through. Right. So here, this Turkish story, it's like this is the first Turkish story we've ever read, and did really make sense to us. But the thing that hooked you was this golden thread breadcrumb of becoming king and being like, that's not, you know, everyone's cheering for me, right? The profane world is like all over it. Everyone would love to be me, but there's something not quite right. Right. And we had an inkling of that with Gopani Kufa, where he wanted it, but we're like watching, going like, yeah, I don't know. Like, would we want that? I don't know. And here explicitly, this boy who is fearless, and very powerful. He can, like, you know, hold back the sort of forces of the divine and a feminine, right, in manifold and in triplicate. And yet he gets backed into this thing, and he explicitly says this is a disaster. Like, coming into the situation as king, as incomplete king, and we'll explain why that is an absolute disaster. And so what's interesting is that when dreams follow on each other, or fairy tales, they are triggers for insight and reflection. Yeah. Right. So, like, what is the official reading of this Turkish fairy tale? Like, who knows? If I asked some of my friends in Turkey, they would say, well, you know, classically it's this, and 90% of the time it's some allegorical moral of the story kind of thing. Right. And so there is no sort of definitive reading of any of these things, just like there is no definitive reading of a dream. But when a dream comes to you, when a myth or fairy tale comes to you like this, it is more a door that opens. It is a trigger inviting you into deeper reflection. uh, it's a dream world, right? And one of the ways to sort of find your bearings in a dream world is to find the symbol that is consistent from one dream to the next. And that is the kind of thing that will get you through. When we do healing, it's like we have these general framework of motifs of lost board member and protector / bully and everything. And then those basic archetypes will then show up in dreams in very, very different forms from dream to dream. But the basic framework is like this compass, this navigational compass that gets you through. So anyway, in this example, we have this sort of kingship, is very powerful. I mean, the power is real, right? Both Gopani Kufa and this boy are king for real. They have real power, and something is off, like in a big way, right? Something is off in a big way. So that's the commonality that brings us some kind of orientation into this next story. But the rest of it is very unfamiliar to me and Gowrie and myself as well. And so it's the commonality that brings you in, gives you a little bit of confidence to like step into the cave of this next dream. And then from there, as a jumping off point, you try to make some sense of everything else. And then that will lead you to the next one. It's this golden thread that is easily broken, as in that poem from William Stafford from a year ago now. You know, it's easily broken with a shrug, with a, oh, you know, this is just, you know, it's just dreams. It's just neurons firing. The shrug of indifference that instantly breaks that gossamer thread. That is the golden thread that leads you through, I mean, ultimately, I'll just say it, the meaning and purpose of your life, right? So let's dive into this a little bit. First thing to say for those of you who may be new to sacred space, who may be new to like how we read dreams, the way we read dreams, myth, fairy tale, even actual events that happen in the outer world, both at an individual level and at a collective level, is our bias is to read them from a mythopoetic standpoint. And there's a lot to say about, there are other talks where I've explained that in more detail, but the quick thumbnail of what mythopoetic means is that, at least for a dream like this, or a fairy tale like this, we read the dream regarding every major actor in the dream as a symbol of a different part of your own inner self. So the mother is a part of you, the boy is a part of you, the fear he is looking for is a part of you, the three maidens is a part of you, the bracelet, etc., etc. So all different parts of you. The major two, typically, at least in this forum, we don't have a lot of time necessarily. So the two major ones are like inner masculine, inner feminine, the different functions and meaning of which I've talked about in past sessions. So you start there, you hit the play button, you let the video unspool, the story unspool, and then you look for the clues to the message, which is who's doing what to whom, who's going where, who's resisting entreaties or invitations, and you just sort of watch the action and see what insights come to you. Okay. So that's what we'll do here. Now, the first thing to say about this boy is to really kind of reassert in a way that this is not an actual boy, right? This boy in the story is a mythopoetic symbol of your own inner masculine, your own emerging inner masculine. When you see babies and children in dreams, they're a symbol of like the version 2.0 of that part of you, right? So if you see a boy, it is the emerging version 2.0 inner masculine. So this is this new chapter of your inner masculine. And this is not an actual human boy, right? And one of the reasons we know this, I mean, this is how we read it, but when we read these dreams and fairy tales, you get additional kind of confirming consistent clues, right? And here we have a feature that is classic in fairy tales, where the boy is clearly not a human because he lacks a major human kind of characteristic, which is fear, right? So all humans, all animals have fear, and this boy has no fear. So right there, you know, it's not an actual boy, but a symbol of the principle of a part of your inner self. Another example of this is like the more European fairy tale of Bluebeard, right? Bluebeard. You know instantly there that Bluebeard is not a real man, right? He's just, he's a symbol of something within you. And the reason you know that Bluebeard is not an actual man is because men don't have blue beards, right? And so the question is, what is the principle of this boy here? And we try to look at that through his behavior, like who he is, how he identifies, and his behavior. So we know that the inner masculine, right? The two major functions of the inner masculine is boundary control, right? Protection and boundary control, and manifestation, right? Going out beyond the pale, beyond the sort of ambit of your village, and then taking more territory, getting the resources you need to fulfill, right, the vision and the inner feminine, which is the counterpart of the inner masculine. Her two functions are nurturing nourishment, and she is the holder of vision, right? The Greek muses, the three graces, the nine muses, the three graces, all of them are feminine, and there's a reason for that. Vision comes from the feminine. Manifestation comes from the masculine. And again, these are not gendered sort of terms. Every human being has both inner masculine and inner. You can call it different names like yin yang or light dark left right. But when we see them in fairy tales and dreams, they show up as a boy. They show up as his mother and the three maidens. So we just kind of like throw up our hands and roll with it and say that he is not male, right? But the masculine principle. Okay. So his job is boundary control and manifestation. So right at the beginning of the story, there was a boundary violation. When the wind blows open the door, and it's terrifying to the feminine, his mother. Okay. And the wind is a symbol of spirit, right? So there are three different realms, which I'll get into, but the realm of spirit is one of the three realms. So the air realm and wind is generally, even in the sort of Abrahamic biblical tradition, this is true, right? Wind and birds in the Bible are basically interchangeable. You know, when St. Francis of Assisi can talk to birds, right, and animals, that there's a coded sort of reference in that, right? So wind and birds. So in the beginning, it's the wind. The three maidens show up as the doves, and then the bird lands on his head, anointing him as king. Okay. So right off the bat, there's this boundary violation of the spirit, the wind, coming in, and puts the feminine into fear. Okay. But the masculine, the boy, he's not integrated with the feminine. He doesn't see, he cannot take her vision, right? He doesn't see what the issue is, right? She feels fear and he does not feel fear. So right off that, we have a problem. He does not feel the fear that she feels. And so in a state of wonder, in the sacred, all good, he goes out on his quest to try and find fear, right? To try and find fear. And this is where the sort of challenge of the story happens, because there's a couple of different ways. There's two or three different tracks that Gary and I sort of went down and tried to sort of look at this. And again, I just want to emphasize again that the goal here is to allow the story to put us into reflection. Certain stories come to you in your life, they stay with you over years. And the first reading may be so-and-so, and after weeks or months or even years go by, you return to the story somehow, serendipitously, and you see it in a completely different light. But your original reading snaps together with your current reading, and you get this even deeper insight, right? So this is like a longer fermentation, gestation kind of thing. And so for me, in, let's just say, today's reading, the first reading that I feel most comfortable with, and we won't go into the other sort of paths we went down. for this reading, we really kind of were drawn to the nature of the three trials with the three maidens. Okay. Now you remember the three trials were, the sort of the wrapping of the hand coming up, which we realized later on is a hand of the maiden. When he put her on his shoulders and she was trying to like sort of squeeze him, and then he threw her off. Okay, so that was number two. And then the third was when the ship was sinking and he actually goes down into the lower realm of the underwater. And he like stops her from bringing the ship down, filled with men, right? So filled with the masculine. And so the signal sort of characteristic thing that happens in every trial, right? The way we're reading it today is that he refuses engagement with the other realms, right? And interestingly, not even out of fear, but just out of this kind of rigidity, this thoughtless, not thinking rigidity, this almost peasant conservative sensibility, where he has no curiosity whatsoever of these maidens, of these things he's running into. He simply just consistently, out of habit, refuses engagement with the other realms, right? So generally speaking, we talk about the three realms. In the sort of mythopoetic realm, right? There are three separate realms. In different systems, there may be four realms, but generally it's three. And the three realms are the regular realm, the sort of realm of us here as humans. A second realm is the upper realm of the spirit, right? Sky, intellect, symbolized by winds, symbolized by birds, angels, helicopters, airplanes, and dreams, right? And then the third realm is the underrealm, sometimes known as the chthonic realm, the underworld, the dark world, where all the creepy crawlies live, right? So if you have done healing work with me, that is the realm of the lost board member. We go down to look for the lost board member, not up into like love and light and spiritual stuff and enlightenment, right? We go down into the dark, scary places. The underrealm is where the dragons live, where all the creepy crawlies live. In dreams, right, it will often show up as the basement of your house, or a well, or a hole in the ground, or a sewer, right? And you are generally terrified of even admitting it's there, let alone going into this realm. Now, going underwater is kind of an alternate form of the realm. So the three realms are, above, here, and then below. And then there are kind of two versions of below. There's underwater, and then there's underground. Even in the Greek system, you have a sort of symbol of this, where Poseidon, right? The two brothers of Zeus are Hades and Poseidon. And Poseidon is, we think of him as like King Neptune, King Poseidon, where he controls the undersea, under ocean realm, underwater realm. But Poseidon properly is in charge of earthquakes as well. So he's the underground realm as well. And then somehow the third brother, Hades, is of the underworld, which is even below that. So that's why I say there's generally three realms, but the sort of underground will split into like underwater, and then even below that with the underworld, which is what we talk about in the Demeter and Persephone story from a couple weeks ago. Okay. So given these three realms, certain symbolisms that come to us in dreams, in sort of classical mythology, become very special. So for instance, the symbol of a waterfowl, right? For instance, a duck. A duck is a symbol that in modern dreams shows up very rarely, at least from the several thousand people I've worked with, right? You rarely kind of see this kind of symbol. And a duck is a symbol of a part of you, obviously, that is a bird, that is of the air realm, but also is naturally native to all three realms. So a duck is perfectly comfortable on land, can fly perfectly well, and can also dip underwater, right? And it's not just It can hold its breath for a long time. It goes underwater for nourishment. It eats by going underwater. So it's a very normal sort of realm for it to be in, right? It's not like it can just peek in every now and then. It's underwater like all day long, right? Getting its food and sort of using its bill to look for its food in the mud. The more royal versions of waterfowl are kingfisher is one, very special one, and then also the swan, right? Even to this day, right? People don't eat swan. We eat goose, we eat duck, we eat chicken. We don't eat swan. I think, I'm pretty sure even the Chinese don't eat. I mean, I'm Chinese, so it's not like, as far as I know, like the Chinese don't eat swan, which is saying something, because the Chinese eat everything. So there is this sort of mythopoetic feeling of like some things. It's like the royal capability of like going across all three realms. That's something you don't mess with in the profane, right? That's something you don't mess with. So for me, at every turn, when we talk about circumambulating through the labyrinth of your life, right? The ups and downs of life, the roller coaster, you can almost say that the path to circumambulation to a full and healthy, well-lived life is to naturally traverse across all three realms in a natural rhythm of life. Right? Sometimes you're very intellectual, sometimes you're very embodied, sometimes you're down in the dumps, and this is normal. This is okay. There's all kinds of symbolisms across world traditions around this. So the very basic one is the tree of life, right? In many different traditions, you have this idea of the tree of life. And the tree of life symbolizes the bridge across all three realms, right? The trunk is the sort of current realm. The leaves go into the spirit and take nourishment. And the roots go down into the chthonic world. And not just tolerate earthworms and cockroaches and snakes and rats, but actually is the home of all these things, right? Is the home of all these things. Humans themselves have been compared to trees, right? In certain traditions, humans are, like in the Greek tradition, humans are seen as a sister race of the gods, where we're like very symbolic, where we come out of the ash tree, right? So we are, like in certain Greek traditions, we are the ash tree people. So we are a race of trees and compared to the gods. And so in the Hindu tradition, if those of you who have taken like clarity meditation program with me, we talk about the Bhava chakra. And there you have the 6 realms, 3 above, 3 below, but it basically breaks down into 3. There's the Deva realm up above, there's the Naraka realm down below, the underworld, and then the in-between, the sort of human realm, the Manusha realm, the Tiryagoni, sort of the sort of in-between, and basically breaks down into 3 general realms. The Christian Middle Ages, Wheel of Fortune, going up, middle, and down as well. So the point here is that there's this very basic motif that going up into the spirit realm, going down into the underrealm, in between, this is not just okay, but it is necessary for a fully well-lived, well-circumambulated life. Okay. You cut all the branches of a tree off, it will die. You cut all the roots of a tree off, it will die. You can't just be from spirit or chthonic. And certainly if you cut the trunk, it's like you cut the bridge itself. Okay. And so the thing that jumps out at us in this story is that in these 3 trials, where the youth engages with these 3 goddesses of the inner feminine, trying to find a way of reconciliation, it is a question, does he pass the trials? And on one level, he does pass and become king. But it's this sort of wrong path. And we'll talk about why it's the wrong path, right? But the way he passes is that he specifically refuses to engage with the other realms, right? In the first trial, when the hand comes up from the chthonic realm and asks for nourishment, right? Can I have some of that cake? For those of you who've been following for a few months now, what is the number one rule, right? When a figure from the other realm comes to you, a gnome, a dwarf, a dragon, or whoever, right? The number one thing is, let's make a deal. Let's make a deal, and then deal with these parts of you in good faith. If you say you're going to do something, try to follow through and do it. Okay. And what does this youth do? He wraps it on the hand and says, oh, pish, go away. What are you even doing here? That's not appropriate, right? So basically, he says, go away. He's not even going to talk to you, right? You stay on your side of the boundary. I stay on my side of the boundary. I think when I was talking to Gary, like one of her points was that, normally you would expect him to like run away screaming, but he has no fear, right? Because at least that you'll like spring load, eventually boomerang back and come to face it. Or you could just do the normal thing, the normal ideal thing, which is, okay, who are you? You have some curiosity as to like this hand that's coming up out of nowhere. Who are you? What do you want? What do I get in return? What is this realm you're coming through? He has zero curiosity. It's like talking, as my Latin teacher in high school used to say to us when we were like really screwing up. He's like, it's like talking to a wall. I'm positive he never said that about me. So I'm not even going to talk to you. You stay there, I stay there, and that's it. Then he moves on to the second trial by the lakeside, where he is literally at the nexus of the three realms. There's the crying boy, right, up in the upper realm on the swing, right, too high to reach on your own. So that's a ding, ding, ding symbol, right? That's the upper realm. He's at the edge of the lake of the water where he could get pitched in easily because, the fairy, the maiden is like, well, come closer to the edge. And the minute she says that, you're like, okay, what is going to happen here? So you are the sort of foundation, the manifestation for inner feminine to get on your shoulders, to be able to reach up and literally bridge across all three realms. Okay. Because you can imagine you're working with the inner feminine to bridge all three realms, where she may grab the kid, the boy, and then pitch the sort of the main hero boy down into the water. There are all kinds of permutations on where there can be congress, right? There can be engagement and flow and interaction between the upper realm, the middle realm, and the underrealm. And again, he refuses, right? He lets her do this, and then when she starts cutting off his air for whatever reason, it's not clear why. Right, he like pushes him off, knocks her out for several hours by her own accounting, takes the bracelet and moves forward. Finally, on the third trial, which is kind of very telling to me, right? The third maiden is not even at this level. She is again below, right, under the water. So he didn't want to go into the lake the first time, but now he has no problem going underwater to where she is, pulling the ship down. So the extraordinary thing is, he does go so far as to traverse the realm, the boundary, into the underrealm. But he actually does this in order to stop the traversing and pulling the ship of men down. Because when you're on a ship and you go down, it is going down into, dark night of the soul and healing and going down to like meet your shadow and all these sort of classic psych terms. And the amazing thing here is like, it's not that he can't go down. He can go down. He's just this like stone wall. He's just stonewalling true sort of integration and traversing between the realms. He goes down without fear and stops her. Right? He like uses a rusty knife, cuts it off and chains her to a rock. And she's like, oh my gosh, you chained me to her. Of course, she gets free later because she's just playing along, right? Seeing what you do. And what he's demonstrating to me across all three trials is that he's like, it's not that I'm afraid of going into the other realms. I just, for whatever reason, do not want any congress between them, right? So without fear, he also has no imagination, right? He maintains the status quo. He cannot imagine what the other realms are like. He doesn't care what the other realms are like. Even when he goes down into the other realms, it's just to keep everything apart, right? To keep the ship up above, to keep the maiden down below, and he wants nothing crossing over the boundaries. There's a point here that Gary may want to say more about later, which is this link between imagination and fear, which is, we know he has no fear, but there's this sort of subtle link of like, he also clearly, lacks for imagination, right? And wonder and curiosity, right? So he goes out looking for fear, but at the same time, it's like, he asks the robbers, he asks the sailors, is fear with you? But he doesn't ask the maidens about fear. Right? He has no curiosity as to what this hand is. He has no curiosity about what's going on with the swing. He doesn't ask questions, which for those of you who have done healing with me on the sort of mythic side, this is very similar to the failure of Parsifal in the Fisher King in his first encounter with the Holy Grail. Right? Where you will remember his failure is that he fails to ask the healing question when he is in the Grail Castle, in the presence of the Grail King. And the reason he doesn't ask questions, he is moved out of empathy to ask, like, what is going on here? Why is he writhing in pain? But he holds himself back because of his training, right? Code of honor of the Arthurian Knights, where I think it's like, what was his mentor's name? Gurnemont, right? The old veteran knight, trains him in all the arts of fighting and warfare and chivalric code. And one of the injunctions is, a good knight does not ask questions, which is just devastating, right? So he follows that dictate of the profane, dictate of like the straight and narrow, right? Even if you imagine something, even if you're curious, do not ask questions. And he fails to achieve the Grail on the first try. And he's like derided. The angels come down and basically yell at him for how, like, a good portion of the story. And he spends the next something like 30 years trying to get back to it. And then the second time he does it. But the circumambulation of that is the nourishment of the entire story. So here with this boy, without fear, without imagination, he blindly, instinctively, reflexively maintains the status quo. And then the interesting thing in this Turkish tale is that this is the thing that qualifies him, at least in one dimension, to be king. Okay. And when the birds, again, the birds, the same as the doves, the same as the wind blowing in the door right at the beginning of the story, it's the same wind, life force power, that comes in and anoints him as king. So you would think, oh, your typical fairy story, it's like he's the king, so hooray, happily ever after, everything's fine. But in this Turkish story, it's much more subtle. Because the vision that comes to him, right, when the dove finally lands on him, he actually starts to get vision and imagination. And with that, fear floods into him as well, where he sees now his future life, which is that he is king. He can't do anything he wants, right? He will, of course, everyone around him is like, oh, you're going to be rich, you're famous, you're going to have all this power and prestige. He doesn't see that. The vision that brings him, that is the restoration of his imagination and the recovery of his fear, is that now as king, he will have to make sad people happy, poor people rich, impossible, right? Impossible. And do all the, he doesn't get to do anything he wants. And so the question is, why is this impossible? Right? Why is this impossible? And one of the things we came up with here in our reflection is that his MO, right, his reflexive path has been to refuse to traverse the realms. That's like the characteristic thing about him. Like he goes out looking for fear and he finds fear. So there's a change from A to B. He didn't have fear, now he has fear. But the thing that doesn't change is his refusal to traverse the realms. That's just something about this version 2.0 of your inner masculine. And then there will be a 3.0 version that will hopefully heal that as you circumambulate further in your life. But for now, this dude, refuses to traverse the realms. And if you refuse to traverse the realms, you can't make sad people happy. You can't make the sad parts of you happy. You can't make the poor parts of you rich. Right? Because you can't go from sad to happy or poor to rich without traversing realms. You can't heal without traversing realms. You can't find your bliss and meaning in life without traversing realms. Right? You have to start where you are, and it can be any direction. There's no formula, right? But an example of traversing realms is you're where you are, you're just in this normal thing. People come, force a mask onto you, you go off, you go to college, you do all these things that you're supposed to do. And then you start imagining like what you actually want, which is perhaps different from the state of being in life you're in. And you traverse realms into the spirit realm, and you start moving toward that. And then that pitch trips you into the realm of chthonic and transformation. Right? It's like the caterpillar starts eating, and it's the caterpillar's eating that pitches the caterpillar into the cocoon where he basically dies, and then comes up hopefully again as a butterfly. Right? The caterpillar is definitely traversing realms. There is no transformation without traversing realms. Caterpillar is at the tree trunk level, goes down into the chthonic, into the cocoon, and then comes up and into the spirit realm as butterfly. Full traversing of all three realms. Right? So for instance, like if you try to become rich without traversing realms, right? You start off saying, oh, money is just a human invention. It's not a life force. It's just all numbers. Oh, and by the way, it's the root of all evil, right? And if you don't traverse realms into what money is really, or go down into like, well, now I have no money. I have to like come to terms with it and you know, try to reconcile with it, because I'm realizing I can't just shit on money and still use it. That's not cool, right? You can't do that to any part of you, right? Where like the life force of sex, the life force of charisma, the life force of the power of your voice, the life force of you maintaining boundaries, right? You can't, in a sustained way over the course of an entire life, say, no, I don't care about you, even though I use you anyway, right? So if you say money is all numbers, money is the root of all evil, and yet you work and you demand to be paid and you pay your rent and you like money to buy nice things, this inconsistency and refusal to traverse the other realms, to get some elbow room, to kind of work yourself out of the box you're in. Anyway, long story short, if you're like money is all numbers and the root of all evil, even if you claw your way to being rich, you will not be happy, because there will be this tightness and you know, resentment within you, because you haven't allowed yourself to like, you know, go into the other two lanes of the highway you're on to really get full range of motion, right? There's no straight line from caterpillar to butterfly, right? The caterpillar, you have to go into this lane and then up into the other lane to really traverse the full path of the meaning and purpose of your life, right? Which the meaning and purpose of caterpillar, you could say, is to become a butterfly and then go back into caterpillar again. You can almost say that it is in the traversing of realms where all delight comes from, right? And so for this guy, he is chosen as king by the same wind, the birds and wind from the beginning of the story, to manage only the realm of the profane. Okay. So now he is king. And he can't refuse. Because the question is like, well, he could like push back the hand and refuse the maiden and stop the maiden from pulling the ship underground. So he's clearly powerful. Why can't he say no to being king? Right? And the reason he can't say no is because to say no, he's been on this straight path. And now he's going to be king in this impossible situation because he's not able to traverse the realms, right? And that inability to traverse the realms is also, by my reading, the reason he can't say no, right? Because in order to say no to this kingship, the straight line linear thing is like, well, everyone, you know, the doves, whoever they are, came and chose you. So you're not going to traverse the realms and go up and ask the doves, like, what the hell? You've spent all this time with the maidens, right? In across 3 trials, and you've never asked them a single question. There's like no curiosity, no wonder. You're just like straight and narrow. I want to find the answer to this initial question, right? So you're in this realm where everyone around you would love to be king. Everyone envies you, right? Everyone wants to be king, but only for the profane reasons, for prestige, for material comfort, for physical safety, for emotional validation, for job security, for prestige, right? These are all the sort of reasons the townspeople want to be king. And you're stuck in that realm. You're stuck at the tree trunk level. You can't go up into the branches or down below. Because in order to say to the profane world who's like giving you the victory laurel and all the gold and all the prestige and everything, how do you say no to that? The only way you can say no is to say, I have higher vision than this. There is something that is even more important to me than being king in this way. But in order to be able to say that, you need to traverse realms. Because you can't see vision when you're standing on the ground. You have to be up in the leaves and branches of the trees to see out, right? And then you can't manifest this spreading out of your branches and fulfilling your vision without going even deeper into the chthonic. Because given any tree, right, when you look at the crown of a tree and how grand it is, right, you know underneath, and nobody likes to think about this, the root system is just as broad underground. Because if it weren't, the tree would fall over, because it's literally not grounded enough. So to go higher, you have to go deeper and into even more scary realms. So now the reason I'm reading it with this, and I have this sort of extra confidence, it's basically like solving an algebra equation. You take the constants and you solve for the unknowns, right, the variables. And so obviously it's a mistake because he's screaming, no, 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 I don't want to be king. But what's the other constant clue we have that it is a mistake? And the clue that we have here is that there has been no proper reconciliation between inner masculine and inner feminine. Right? One of the tricks, one of the constants in fairy tales across all world religions, all world sort of traditions, is that in dreams and fairy tales and myth, one way to express a key goal, right, where you know everything's fine, is that the inner feminine and the inner masculine reconcile, reunite, and reintegrate in a correct manner. There's a big wedding, everyone's happy, right? No one's being held prisoner or forced to marry. So that's one thing. And then the other is like in some of the stories we read, the beginning state is that, you know, the couple is childless, right? So if they end up having a child by the end, you know that what's happened in between is good. It's like it's the right way to do it. But if they remain childless in the end, even if they're rich, this is like the Shiro, the white dog story from Japan we did several months ago. At the end of that story, right, he was rich, he was prosperous, but he still didn't have a child, right? So that's the hidden coded language of like, there's something still off. So look at what happened and see what might be off. So here, he's the king, he's powerful, but 2 things are off. One thing is he's screaming like, I don't want to do this. That's like kind of a dead giveaway, right? But the other is that he explicitly says, seemingly out of nowhere, I can't do anything I want. I have to make sad people happy, poor people rich. And in addition, I cannot marry the girl I love. And it's like, where did that even come from? There was no like love interest through this story. And there was no like longing. It was just like, it's a given. It's an obvious. So it seems like it's just stuck in there out of context, you know, shoehorned in there. Like there's nothing in the plot up to this point that points to like his true love. Right? But almost as a complete description in this symbolic code of like, yeah, this is the messed up scenario. This is not the scenario you want to be in. He adds the point explicitly I will not marry the girl I love and really want to marry. Right? In linear sort of forms, if you read the story literally, it's like, well, you're the king. Can't you just pick whoever you want and they'd love to marry you? And somehow he explicitly says, no, that's not how the physics work here. And you have to ask yourself the question, why is that? It's in all these stories we've read in LSS and also in Private Healing, the Frog King, Cinderella, Snow White, the Handless Maiden, even in the Fisher King. The correct prince and princess, inner masculine and inner feminine, need to finally get together and have their happily ever after, right? And be fruitful and multiply. So when they have kids, it's not a symbol of literal biological children. This is the inner masculine within you, regardless of your gender, and the inner feminine within you, coming together in full reconciliation, right, and harmony. And from that springs the generativity, the productivity, the creativity of you as an artist, following your bliss, healing your wounds, et cetera, which then leads to creativity and delight and a life of bliss. So the secret coded giveaway here is that he explicitly says he can't marry the girl he loves. So you look at one way to read a fairy tale or a dream is you look at the end state versus the beginning state, right? So in the beginning, he's with his mother, which is not the right feminine for like procreation, right? And at the end, he is king. He's very prestigious and very powerful. Everyone bows to him. He has found fear, in like almost the worst way. But also he is in the state of desolation, right? Being the king himself is fear. He has found fear and failure. And the key sort of cherry on top is, well, obviously, you haven't found the right feminine either. Right? This right feminine doesn't even appear in the story. It's not like he had her and then lost her. She just never even showed up. Because he kept repulsing all the feminine sort of entreaties to cross boundary. And then they drink to his health. They're like, yeah, this guy will work, not for the ultimate, but we can stick him in as the profane king and it'll be fine. And when they stick him in and they anoint him by landing on his head, he's like, this is a horror, right? This is a dead end. How do I get out of this? And that's almost the insight of this circumambulation. And then you can almost imagine a part 2 of the story where, he has this midlife crisis and breaks out, escapes the palace, and goes down into the underground, it's almost this deeper level of fear. It's like, so you found fear and this is one configuration of it, and eventually you like break out of it and you go into perhaps an even deeper level of fear, which is, the fear of which is what keeps you in the palace for like 20 or 30 years, right? But eventually it gets to be too much. You're like, am I going to continue doing this, or am I going to actually take a shot at like, realizing my meaning and purpose in life? So you could almost say traversing the realms across all three is the circumambulation that churns the butter of life that leads to delight, right? And here, when you refuse the other realms, it doesn't matter. It's not because he's evil. He just like has this archetype where it's like, no, everyone stays where they are. There's no congress between them. And the pattern that this is revealing for the insight is that when you refuse the other realms so consistently, there is no happily ever after. There is no delight. I don't care how big your kingdom is or how prestigious a king you are. If you stay in just one realm, it's just not the right answer, right? And it's across all three realms. So if you stay just in the upper realm, right? If you're super spiritual, you're all about wellness, meditation, new age, and you end up using that as a numbing agent to escape going down into grief, ugliness, weakness, right? You never go down into the root level. Everything's love and light. Everything's love and light, right? Everything's always positive no matter what. Then also you won't have the full vision, right? So I would almost extend it to say it's not that there's something wrong about staying just at the tree trunk level. It's like if you stay at any level, all spiritual, all chthonic, all whatever, it's not going to work because you need all three. You need to exhale, pause, and inhale. You need all three phases to have full respiration, right? It's the churning across all three realms. It's the delta, right, that gets everything going, like the bellows of the world. Okay. And the true source of fear, is not to go down into the chthonic and like face your like wounds or whatever. The true source of fear, by my reading, is not to do that. That's the true source of fear that this story is sort of speaking to me. Said one way is this. You're like, oh, you fear going down into your grief. You have all these horrible childhood wounds and you don't want to go down into grief. And you don't want to go down into the chthonic and reconcile with those fears, get back the part that you lost from, you know, the sort of these wounds that you suffered in childhood, which are not your fault, by the way. Nobody asks to be wounded, right? So nobody's wounds are their fault because nobody asks to be wounded. So you fear that and you don't want to go into the grief, right? But by this story, it's like not going into grief, not traversing the realms, is actually the really scary thing, right? Because what's the classical kind of example? I avoid my wounds, I avoid my grief, and instead I drink for 20 years, right? And somehow that is less scary than going into grief, right? And now there's nothing wrong. It's not unreasonable. People do this all the time, right? They drink for 20 years, they like blow up their life, they like whatever, all because they fear going down. And, you know, the reality is when you finally like let go of your fear and go down, it takes a few months, maybe, maybe a year, but then, you know, you're done. And not done like you'll never go down again, but it's like you're done in the sense of like, okay, I know what my basement looks like. I know what's hiding down there. And frankly, it's like when it's dinner time, I bring them food too. And it's like, you can come up. I mean, you're a part of the family. Come up and sit at the dining table and eat with us. And, you know, the basement's still dark. It's still scary for other people when they see me going down there. But the point is, it's my basement, right? Every room in this house is mine. Okay. So the scary thing, the scariest thing, right? The true source of fear is to not go down there. Because the state of affairs you have when you refuse to traverse all three realms is way worse than going down into them, right? Because you don't reclaim, you don't reclaim yourself. You get stuck in this thing where you can't make sad people happy, you can't make poor people rich, and you can't have full integration with all the different parts of yourself. You can't marry the girl you actually love. And so this is the reality. And it's not, you know, the line that our 90% profane society tells us, right? What does our profane society tell us? You can control everything. You don't have to give up control. If you have troubles, just here, drink this, take this pill, and it'll wash all your troubles away. And it does work for a little while, but it doesn't work forever. That's the problem, right? This is how profane society, because it's profane, because it's all fear, threat, and control. I have to stay in control or else. I have to keep the three realms separate or else, right? And so this is how profane society misleads us, because profane society itself is afraid of the three realms. Okay, so that is kind of the angle at which I approach this in my notes in our brainstorm. And Gary, are you there? I can kind of hear you.
Can you hear me? All right. Okay.
So those are my notes. Anything to add? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I was kind of reminded of personally for me when you mentioned all of the three trials. The way it struck me, you know, it's so familiar that when the hand comes from the underground and asks for nourishment, you kind of rap on it and say, it's not for you, and you go back to your place, right? That is one extreme of a reaction. And then the other extreme of the reaction is when you said, You're even willing to traverse realms, go down under the sea, and do whatever is needed, whatever it takes to kind of resolve the situation, handle the emergency. And yet, despite going down so deep into the sea, you forget to engage. I mean, you almost don't want to engage. And ask important questions. So I was kind of thinking of how the classic reactions, and this is a typical archetype in itself, I think, the classic reaction to any kind of red flags in our lives is to pretend like they don't exist. Right? And these red flags keep showing up. And from deep within us, uncomfortable questions keep rising up. And our responses typically to that is, I don't want to do anything about that. And I don't know what you're talking about. Right? So that's typically
right.
The first
response. It's like that's not even a thing.
That's not even a thing.
That's not even a thing. This hand coming up, wanting some of it's like, you're of the dead, you don't eat the food of the living.
Yeah.
That's it.
That's it. That's
like, well, you can still talk to her. Say hello. What are you doing here? What's up?
Right. I mean, it's talking to you. So you can no curiosity, and you completely deny that that's even a thing, like you said. And the next level of response, typical response, is that, all right, okay, you asked me to do this. Go to the edge of the pool and help you reach out to the swing. Okay, I might do that. But when things start to get a bit uncomfortable, then you say, oh, all right, okay, this is not what I signed up for. I'm not doing this. I'm not seeing this through. And that, again, is a typical response. I mean, it happens all the time, right? And the third extreme is you do all of that. You go into the sea. You do all of the emergency sort of handling thing that you have to do. Not because you're curious, not because you want to know what's going on, but because you don't want to rock the boat.
Yeah, literally.
Literally, you don't want to rock the boat. You want everything on the surface to be perfectly fine the way it always was. You want to make sure nothing is in danger. Your relationships are protected exactly the way they are. Your sort of work environment is just the way it is. All of your prestige and what will people say, and your income, your wealth, everything is intact. Nothing is disrupted. But you know that deep under the sea there is an earthquake that's happening, which threatens to disrupt everything in your life. And you'll go into therapy, you'll go do yoga, you'll kind of sign up to all kinds of things. I mean, I've done that.
Basically, just to shut it up.
Just to shut it up. Just to shut it up. Just so that nothing is shaken.
Here's the giveaway you hear all the time. Why do I have to do that? I've been in therapy for all these years. I've done all this. I do yoga. I do meditation. I've been on retreats. Are we done yet? I mean, can I go now? Right, that attitude of like, why do I have to read like one more book? Why do I have to do like one more program? And the attitude of like the giveaway attitude is always, are we done yet? Can I stop now? Can I has the maiden stopped pulling on the ship so I can go home because I really don't like being underground?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And then the place where this like softens over time, where you've stayed in the cooking pot long enough, where all the bones and tendons start to like melt and liquefy and become, capable of nourishing you, is when you say, no, I'm okay down here. It's like, isn't it cold and damp in the basement? Don't you want to come up into the light? And after a while, you're like, no, I'm fine down here. I like it down here. And I'm fine with I'm fine being here because this is my house too.
Right.
The dark underground, like this is a part of me too. So why would I favorite less. It's like there's a story, I don't remember where I read this. It's like the shipwreck story, right? Where this guy was on a rubber raft. His like a whale like overturned a ship or something, and he was rationing all this rainwater to like stay alive. And literally, he had this like 9 ounces of like cooled rainwater that he was like looking at all day and would not drink it. Would not drink, because he's like, if I drink this, it's going to take me another week to like get this much, so I'm going to ration it. And finally, I think the story was like some Portuguese like fisherman like saw him. I think because he like had caught a fish and was like feeding it back out to like the seagulls or something. There were seagulls all around him. And the fisherman motored over to like, check it out, to get in on the action. And they saw him and they're like, oh my gosh, are you shipwrecked? He was like, oh, thank God, yes, take me up. And they're like, okay, we'll forget about the fish. We'll just come get you. He's like, no, actually, no, go get the fish. I know what kind of fish there are. Like, go get them and come back and get me in a moment. And they're like, are you sure? He's like covered with sores and everything. And he's like, yeah, go. And they're like, okay, we'll go over here. We'll keep you in view. We'll get the fish and then we'll come get you. He's like, perfect. And he's been at sea for like 3 weeks or something. And in the story, he was like, he was happy in his boat. And he was like, he wanted a moment to like drink all the water he had collected. He wasn't like rushing to the next thing. Finally, I can have champagne. Finally, I can have coffee. No, like, hang on. I'm good, you guys. Just go get the fish, and I'm just fine here.
Right.
Where you get to the point where even like in the Dark Night of the Soul, everyone makes it so dramatic. It's like terrifying. And it is. It is terrifying. But it's also like you are the sovereign of all these realms within you.
Right.
So even the scary dream world is your world. Every monster you encounter in there is a different face of you.
Right.
Every monster you encounter down there is a child of yours.
Right.
And it's okay it's not just that it's okay to stay down there. It's like after a while you're like, you like it down there. Yeah. I'm thinking next week I may do a session on just re-emerging out of the pandemic, because that's I'm getting a lot of sort of feedback on that. And it's very similar. It's like people are kind of, it's like finally we get vaccines, we can travel, we can do all this stuff, but there is this sense of like loss of like, oh, hang on, I'm not in any rush to like go off to a beach or whatever, because I like it here, and I almost have like this pooled water that I want to stay and enjoy. And everyone else can run ahead. It's not like I'm not going to be able to get a plane ticket ever again, right? It's like everyone can rush ahead. I'm really enjoying this. And knowing that there's a bookend of a ship that's coming to like rescue me makes it all the sweeter, because it's like it's contained.
Right.
And I can finish the enjoyment of this and know that I can always come back again. Right. But I was in a session yesterday where one of the people joked that pandemic, one of the silver linings of the pandemic is that it's been an introvert's dream. And her anxiety was basically that, okay, now pandemics, which is great because it is a global tragedy. It's not taking away from that, but being forced to be in has allowed a lot of people who are more introverted to not have to expend all this energy maintaining boundaries with the outer world. And her quote was literally, okay, pandemic's ending, so I actually have to like set up and maintain boundaries for myself again, and I can't just rely on a global pandemic to like encase me in this like fortress of safety and solitude, because people are going to ask me like go out for drinks now and go on trips and everything. It's like, okay. And it is this kind of feeling where the transformation is when, not that you want to stay in one realm forever, right? But like a duck, like a swan, you're perfectly comfortable flying. You're perfectly comfortable waddling around the lakeshore, and you're perfectly comfortable going underwater to like get. All three are native realms to you.
Right.
And that is the power of like being in this realm of transformation.
Yeah. That funnily reminds me of another story that we did a few months ago in November, I think. The story of the Swan Maidens. And that story, when I think about it, almost feels like a direct contrast to this story, in which the hunter, who's the main protagonist of that story, the hunter is comfortable walking in the deep dark forest at night, and he chances on these swan maidens who are bathing in water, and he kind of directly makes a deal with one of the swan maidens. He keeps her robe, he makes a deal with her, he marries her, right? Yeah, and that kind of sort of direct engagement and sort of a union with the feminine. And he is unafraid to kind of cross realms when she leaves him, cross realms, go beyond the seas, beyond forests, beyond a crystal mountain, deep down into the sea, to find her and bring her back. And his whole sort of ultimate aim of all of that quest that he undertakes is that he wants to reconcile with the feminine, right? And that's the only goal. There's nothing else. So, and he's very comfortable kind of traveling across realms. Yeah, sorry, Artie, I can't hear you. I think your mute button is on.
You'll weave across all the lanes of the highway. You'll go up into the sky. You'll go down into tunnels. Whatever. Yeah. You're just following.
Whatever it takes, right? And he's totally comfortable doing that. And the reward as a result is the vision that he has, which so I almost have a feeling that this is the direct contrast of that story, where the boy, his sole objective is to kind of figure out what fear looks like. And he completely misses the point of, even when he actually sees the maidens in their real form, and they're talking about him, they're drinking to his health. And his instinct is not to go up to them and say, were you just sort of playing games with me? What was that, all of that about, right?
Or even asking the Parsival question, which is, what is the matter here? What is even going on here?
What's going on
What's
here?
the deal?
Right? What are you guys doing?
Yeah.
And what's happening here? Who are you? And why did you play all those tricks with me? And what was happening? So instead of asking that, his instinct is to go up to them and say, yes, that's me. Now, can you give me that bracelet? Right? So it's kind of a thing.
Let's get on with it. Let's get on with it.
Let's go with whatever it was. And he is still in the game, right? He's not kind of gone beyond that. And I think the price then is that he does not have the full vision. He gets a part vision, which tells him this is not the ideal. Whatever is sort of set up for you is not the ideal thing. But he doesn't have the full vision of what really is the ideal. I think that's very telling, that if you don't reconcile with the feminine, you really have no vision for what the ideal situation is.
Right.
Kind of.
It's not punishment. This is not the end. He can still,
Yeah. Like you said, he can still break away from the palace in the middle of the night and run away, right?
Circumambulation never ends, and that can either be terrifying or you could see it as a feature and not a flaw, right?
Right. So, but it is very telling to me that if you really want the full vision, then you kind of go through all the realms, but also ask the more important questions and reconcile with the feminine, because the feminine is the holder of the vision, like you say. So so that's it was very sudden when I remembered that story of Swan Maidens. I think I have the link here, so I could actually link that up if anyone wants to check it out.
That'd be great.
So we did the story in November, and it seemed like the most ideal way of sort of integrating with the feminine. You even said that This man, this hunter, is just so comfortable in the forest, in all the realms, right?
Yeah.
And he checks all the boxes. He does everything right. It almost seems like the ideal way. And one of the things that you mentioned there was that, all of these things that are important, he does them. But the key thing is, when you're so deep in forest and you're so comfortable so as to take nourishment from it, even at night, you end up finding things that you weren't even looking for. Right? I mean, he finds the swan maiden. He wasn't looking for her.
Right.
But he ends up finding her anyway.
Right.
And
interestingly, she is a swan maiden. Right.
She's a swan maiden again. The being
his
of
comfort is mirrored by her form as a swan.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's what I find interesting is that this boy sets out with this objective of finding fear. And he goes through all these mountains and forests and everything, and he does find things that he isn't even looking for. But he
refuses them. Yeah.
Thing he misses is to kind of engage with them, and sort of make a bargain, like we found in that other story. I said, if I give you cake, what will I get in return?
Right. Get me out of this palace.
and he asks everybody. He asks the gang of robbers if they know where to find fear. He asks the sailors if they know fear. But he forgets to ask that question to the three maidens.
Right.
So it's kind of just missing the point a little bit, and it completely veers off into a different direction. So that brings me to a question, if I may.
Sure.
Is I think a couple of weeks ago you were talking about archetypes, how we step into certain archetypes, how we kind of, if we are aware of what archetype you're in, then we kind of can choose to move to another archetype, question and wonder what archetype we want to be in, and how we can consider moving to another archetype. And I find that this boy is in this archetype where he doesn't question, if it doesn't find his vision, doesn't ask the important questions. He does all of those things that he misses the path and goes into this archetype of the king. And he's not conscious. He's not chosen this, and he doesn't want it when it happens, but he finds himself there. So is there a thing where, what is the deciding thing that brings this archetype to him? How do we even land up with archetypes when we don't know we're choosing them? What drives these archetypes in the first place?
I mean, there's two. Thank you for that question. So there's two ways to really think about it. One is that, in a more kind of psych standpoint, it's like, oh, you have wounds. You when you're born, you parachute into whatever culture, family, birth order, all these things. And then you get, an archetype given to you. It's the mask that they tell you to put on. We want you to be the good girl, right? The loyal, chaste, serving daughter who puts others' needs before her own. That's an archetype.
Right.
We want you to be the capable boy and, go and bring back prestige and honor to the family and make lots of money. And if you do that really, really well, maybe we'll even overlook if you're not actually good, right? So we'll forgive these transgressions, look the other way, as long as you're fulfilling these other aspects of the archetype, of the mask that we ask you to put on. And then it's kind of a signal thing about going into midlife, from early adulthood into midlife, is if you're lucky, if you've are open and you ask questions, right, you will start to realize, or actually be reminded of the fact that this thing you're wearing is a mask. It's not the real you.
Right.
And then the question becomes, well, what is the real me? Right. And you can't start to even consider that question if you don't traverse realms.
Right.
Because if you're no, I'm just the straight and narrow, it's no, I am a strong boy, I'm a good girl. And this is just who I am. I mean, this is my life. All these people around me rely on me to continue being this person. So how could I let them down? And that's not an answer at all, right? You're not actually saying this isn't a mask. You're saying if I take the mask, all hell will break loose. But that's a completely different question, right? The question still remains unanswered. Well, what is underneath the mask? And often one is terrified to ask that question. Right? I'll go under the mask just to make sure the mask fits or can continue to be bolted onto my face, but I won't go in with any curiosity. I'll go under to like stop the maiden from pulling the ship down temporarily, but I won't ask her any questions. Right? And from the pattern of these stories, it's like that's not the right move. And if you do that not right move, that's okay. You'll end up as king. And then it almost feeds right into the Fisher King, where it starts off with this wounded king, for whom, the text actually describes him as too ill to live, but unable to die. Right. That is the description of the state of life right at the cusp of midlife initiation and transformation. What we in the profane Western society call midlife crisis, because we don't recognize these transformations. So when something breaks and the caterpillar looks like it dies and goes in the cocoon, we call it crisis because we have no structure to like support this. In traditional cultures, they call it midlife initiation, like the next initiation after the initial one. And so one is like the archetype is given to you. It's like it's part of the wound and part of everything else. The other way of looking at it is to say, I mean, they're not inconsistent with each other, is to say every single one of these fairy tales is a zoom in on a particular part of the labyrinth of life circumambulation. Right? So even this story, it's not an allegorical, you better do this or else. It's like, no, we do this. We try to not traverse realms. And then we get stuck in this like horrible situation. And then the next turn of the next fairy tale is perhaps something where we break out of that. And so any given mask you're given, when you look back when you're older and you look back on the roller coaster, the trials and tribulations of your like earlier life, you'll realize that it traces out a kind of pattern. And you can say, I think someone even in the chat is like, this describes my life of the past several years exactly, right? And it's like, yeah, and the reason there will often be a story when it's read mythopoetically that will completely fit the pattern of a segment of your life is because these archetypes come from the same place, because we're all human, right? So when I say ear, nose, mouth, it's like, you know what I'm talking about. When I talk to a bird about nests and wings and eggs, they know what I'm talking about. It arises out of our biology. And so the fairy tales arise out of our biology, and then our life experience, when we look at them through these lenses, have a consistency about them because we're human too. It arises out of our biology, our life pattern. So even when you're wounded and you don't want to talk about it and you go into these other things, there's a pattern associated with that.
Right.
When you realize that, it's like, instead of saying, oh, I'm the dumb slob, I'm the sort of incapable, I'm not spiritual enough, I'm not good enough. Actually, that's a pattern too. That's okay. But you go through that, and then when you realize everything you're doing, is a part of this larger pattern library, then fear, threat, and control all fall away. And you kind of tip into the sacred where you're like, oh, okay. And your attitude is not of like, what should I be doing? But it's like, so all these books, all these archetypes, I can browse all of them, and I can perhaps pick a different one to go into. Well, that's fascinating. Right? So instead of like asking, like, how do I solve this, and control and curing, you move into this other realm of like wonder and curiosity, right? And not looking for control, and curing, but healing. It's like, so I have two books and they kind of cancel each other out. And instead of saying like, shoot, I'm an idiot, you're like, whoa, that's really interesting. Look at how this current cancels out this other current.
Right.
In the private healing group, just this past Friday, we had an advisee who's like, had these two archetypes and came to her in dreams. And one archetype is like this Disney princess, right? Where she's like looking for the right man and looking for the storybook ending, and yet cannot get that to like complete.
Mm-hmm.
And then in another dream, right, this like deer came out of the forest, limping because still half crippled, and chasing her. And she was terrified of this deer. She's like, "Oh, this deer's gonna kill me." And I'm like, "Well, it's a deer. It doesn't even eat meat." And the deer, and at the same time, she was kind of laughing at it and mocking it because it was hobbled.
Mm-hmm.
And when she like did our process with the deer, right, the healing thing, the deer turned out to be her independence.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So on the and the deer is like the totem animal of Artemis, who is the virgin huntress goddess, twin sister of Apollo.
Mm-hmm.
The same dream series, a bear showed up, which is obviously Athena. So like all these like virgin, warrior, powerful huntress goddesses,
Mm-hmm.
who are like, do I have to even say it? Not Disney princesses.
Right.
Right. Are showing up and coming back to her.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like you have an archetype of the Disney princess, and then you have the archetype of the reverend goddesses Artemis and Athena. And it's like those two books completely cancel each other out.
Right.
Running both at the same time, you will feel stuck in life.
Yeah.
And that's okay. That's not your fault. But
Right.
and the Disney princess part of you is a valid part of you.
Mm-hmm.
And the Artemis Athena part of you is a valid part of you. And the question is, how do you thread the needle
Mm-hmm.
to have both independence and security,
Mm-hmm.
both freedom and validation?
Mm-hmm.
And that is, that's not, oh shoot, how am I going to solve that problem? It's like, whoa, that's like, it's like aesthetic arrest. Like reading her dreams, I was put into the state of aesthetic arrest where I was like, you look at the entire library and you look at the state of affairs, and there's no more fear, threat, or control. You're just like, whoa, this is like amazing. I don't even know what we're going to do about this. You don't even care. You're just like arrested by the beauty of the situation.
Right.
It's like explains everything. And it's like, well, what do you want next? It's like, and you realize this is the situation. It's not because you weren't good enough. It's not because whatever. When you realize a situation for underlying physics, you realize in principle, I can have anything.
Right.
I can be all Artemis if I want to. I can be all like Disney princess if I want to. I can blend it. You elevate into like creator mode, where you realize your intrinsic creator power.
Yeah.
So the question no longer becomes what should I do and what should I want, and more in the direction of like, well, what do I actually want? For no good reason, right? That question of like need, want, desire, delight.
Yeah.
Asking the question at the level of desire and delight.
Yeah.
So yeah, in healing all the time, you like get hit with these, and it's just like amazing.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you.
Did you want to share the exercise for the week?
Yeah.
Questions and reflections?
Yeah, let's do that. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Okay, so the quick exercise here is, okay, so given all this, to reflect only if you want, like no expectation of participation. So you just take 5 or 10 minutes this week with some pen and paper and reflect on these questions, and then just let your hand write, just like barf out whatever comes to you. Sitting in the car, alone or wherever, just only if you want. And the question we came up with was, what is a time in your life when you have wanted everything to stay the same, just as is, no change, right? I like everything the way it is. It's not perfect, but I just do not want anything to change. I want everything to be exactly the same forever. Okay. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just a question, when was a time in your life when you were like that? Maybe that is how you are right now. And the question then is, what finally got you to change? what lured you forward and then like tipped you into the lake to change, or what forced you kicking and screaming into the change, right? It's like a meteor hit you from nowhere and then everything changed anyway. In the process of being dragged into this or being lured into this, did you end up softening your reflex to stop moving and traversing between the realms? Right? Was there a certain degree of freedom of motion between the three realms, of like upper spiritual, regular, earthly, and then lower chthonic? And how did that feel, right? Or did you get dragged from one life phase to the next, kicking and screaming? And if you are, even now feel like you're being dragged into the next phase of your life, kicking and screaming, are you okay with this? Right? If you're okay with it, you're like, that's the way life is. Just get on with it. That's okay. But the interesting question to ask, without fear, just curiosity, is, are you okay with this state of affairs? And if you're not, what do you not like about it? And what would you prefer? Okay. So that is our exercise for the week. Only if you want, no pressure. And now I'll go ahead and close our session. Our next session is next Sunday. It's free, open to the public. Please feel free to invite others if you want. I'll put the link up in Facebook and in Crowdcast. So you can sign up now if you like. And then I'll go ahead and close the session. So I hereby close this session of our shared sacred space. Thank you for holding this space with me and with us. And thank you for sharing the nourishment, the emotional nourishment and the spiritual nourishment of this shared sacred space with us. I give you my blessing. Go in peace, bestowed with blessing, free of fear, free of threat, and free of the undue control of others. Have a great day, have a great week, and I will see you in the next session. Happy Sunday, everyone. Thank you.